This episode is brought to you by Audible.com. Go to audibletrial.com/Bigfoot Hotspot for your free 30-day trial and your first free downloadable book. Tonight on the show, we have Vic, and Vic used to co-host a show on Blog Talk called Campfire Shadows. A great show. I've listened to a lot of the archives, and I've really enjoyed the show. Vic actually sent me 2 different audio files. He sent me one of an encounter he had on his show. I hadn't actually heard the encounter before. And the second piece of audio he sent me was with his co-host Shane. And Shane has unfortunately since passed, but the audio that Vic had sent me was pretty fascinating. It's with Shane during an expedition, and he comes within 10 feet of a Sasquatch staring him down. So I wanted to go ahead and play that tonight for the audience. Before we actually get to that, let me play this encounter because I really found the encounter fascinating, and it's one I hadn't heard before. So we'll go ahead and play the encounter, and then we will bring Vic on.
I used to love the outdoors as a kid, and we moved from the Miami area, northwest Dade County, up to Broward County in 1977. And when we went up to Davie, at the time, there really wasn't very much developed. It was still very wild. And this area, which is called Pine Island Ridge, it's not too far from a little southeast of where Markham Park is now. Markham Park wasn't even there then. And there had been a history of a lot of sightings in the area. I didn't know that. And the Everglades comes over right up to State Road 84, which is now 595, just a little northwest. And I had begun horseback riding and hiking and sometimes even camping out with friends out in this area. It was just really enchanting. A lot of orange groves with ranches and farms and crisscrossed with canals, and there was a series of ridges unique to the area. And, of course, the 84 Canal, which is the North New River, and it goes right out into the Everglades. And I had just been going out in this area for so long, and I had one incident that I really didn't think much of. I attributed it to a wildcat or possibly a panther, and then some lady had warned me at the ranch that night when I got back and told about it. She said, "You better quit going out there. You're going to get ate up by a skunk ape," And she just proceeded to tell me about all these cattle that had been killed and different things like that were attributed to this and sightings and whatnot. But I just could not bring myself to believe it because I had been going out there in this area for maybe 2.5 years without any real incidents. Never saw a track or anything, so I just didn't believe it. So anyway, this one particular night in 1981, I had decided to I had started dating a girl, incidentally, up here in Brevard County at the time. I was down south and couldn't see her, and I wanted to get out, see some of my buddies up there that I always saw, and we used to go for walks out there and catch up on each other's past. And when I started to go out this night, I just had a very, very strange feeling just not to go. And I didn't understand why it was, and I just ignored it, basically. And I got up to my buddy's house, and all the boys were out, which had never happened, and their hounds were out running around. That had never happened. And I didn't really want to go out there alone. Mainly I wanted to talk to the guys, but I was also just getting very, very unnerved by this feeling I was getting. But I decided to go anyway. So I crossed the road, and I was out in the orange groves, and the tree line was about 3/4 of a mile away down this tractor road. It's all gone now. And there was orange groves to the left and wooded hammocks that went into the farms beyond, and to the right was an abandoned golf course and a marshy area. And there was a little lake out that way. And I remember I got out there, and there was a little bit of a moon. The wind was out of the east. It was a mild night, typical beautiful night down there. And I was looking up at the stars, as I often did, thanking God for how nice it was out there. But as I looked off in the distance of the tree line, I just felt uncomfortable. And I thought, I haven't been out here in a while. Well, I got up to this tree line in short order, and as I was coming around the edge of it, you just come around the edge of the hammock, and then all of a sudden you're engulfed in these oak trees and brush, and it's very dark in there. You can't really see. And I got in there, and I crossed a short gully, and I got on the wooded trail, and I noticed how thick it had gotten. It just looked like nobody had been out there in a year or so. In fact, the ridge that I was coming up on was very brushy and had really grown up. It used to be very clear for the most part with scattered oaks and pines, but now there was all this brush and hammocks, very thick in there. And as I was walking along, I just heard this very strange call. I can't describe what it was. It was nothing like I ever heard. It was off to my left. It was very shrill. I only heard it one time, and it didn't really frighten me, but it startled me. And I was thinking to myself, what on earth is that? It's 10:30 at night, you know, birds don't normally make any noise. And I noticed it was a little quiet in there. That wasn't totally unusual, but it was fairly unusual, just very still. And I just tried to forget it. I said, well, I guess it's just, you know, something I never heard, but I wonder what it is. You know, it was bothering me a little bit trying to figure out what it was. So I continued walking down the trail, and I don't know, 5-10 seconds later, all of a sudden, I just got this horrible, horrible feeling. All my hair stood up on end at once, and I looked out, it was over in the direction of where that call came from. I just knew something over there was very bad, and something very bad was about to happen. And, boy, I'm getting chills talking about this. And I had about 80 yards to go to get out of this forested trail up on the ridge where it started to get a little open. So I wasted no time moving along. I kept looking over my left shoulder in that direction, but I couldn't see very far. But I just had a very bad feeling. I was unarmed and I felt very vulnerable. And mind you, I was in my prime. I was 21 at the time. I exercised, lifted weights. I was a surveyor by trade at the time. Felt very confident in myself. And at this moment, I felt very vulnerable and very in trouble. So I got out of this wooded trail, thank God, and I got into this little opening, and I didn't see anything following me. I couldn't smell anything, but the wind was coming from the east. This thing was downwind of me, whatever it was. So I started to get up on the ridge, and when I got up on the ridge, I stopped for a moment. I actually turned my back to the wooded tree line, and I was looking off to the east, way off at the road about almost a mile away, seeing the cars going up and down. It was kind of an overlook for me. But I started noticing how everything had just grown up very brushy, and it irritated me a little bit because the place had been kept so nice. And then I started to walk, and I had turned my back, I guess, on this tree line maybe close to a minute. Well, I was on a sandy horse trail. This ridge line is very hard packed. Down in South Florida, the ground's very hard. There's a lot of rock in it, but even the dirt and sand areas are very hard. And I started walking along, and I noticed, as soon as I started walking, I heard these very, very distinct footsteps in the tree line off to my left, running about parallel to me. And I stopped for a second, and the footsteps stopped immediately. And I turned and looked, and I started to get that very, very bad feeling that I just had moments before. And I was thinking to myself, what is that? I thought it might be hogs, but I started to walk again, and I was looking over, and they resumed walking along parallel, just about 20 to 30 yards away, just in the tree line. And I stopped, and then I heard another step after I stopped, and then it stopped. And I started to get very, very uncomfortable. And I realized right about then, it started dawning on me that this feeling that I had, this premonition, that this was what it was about, and that something, I felt at the time, something very bad was going to happen. And there was the lake at that point was behind me, and I started backing down the slope, and I was looking around, and I picked up a boulder and a stick. That was all that was available. The moon was out, and I was trying to draw it out of the trees. I had this feeling it was going to just come barging out of there. And I began praying an awful lot. I remember that. And I was looking around, and I was thinking, my God, I'm trapped. I looked over at this new condominium development to the north they were building, and it was a good 300 yards away or so. And I would have to go back up toward this thing and get back on the trail to run to it. So I turned around, and I thought about swimming across this lake, but I just had this feeling if I did that, whatever it was going to come get me and catch me in the water, and I didn't want that to happen. And it was just terrifying at that moment. I began to get very panicky, but I remember my dad had told me when I was young in the outdoors, don't ever panic, son, because the animal will know, and that will just make things worse. So I got looking up, and I said, well, I guess I'm going to have to get back up on this trail and just get ahead of it and then take off running. But I waited and waited, and nothing happened. So I slowly angled back up on the trail, and it was dawning on me about the time, my God, this is one of those things, because the footprints were distinctly bipedal. And if any of you have ever been around horses, we had horses there. There's a great big difference when a dog or a person's walking along and then when a horse is walking along or is trotting along, especially when they're trotting. It's kind of thunderous in comparison to a person. The ground almost, you could feel the ground moving. And that's what this reminded me of. It was like a two-legged horse. And the only thing I knew exactly what it had to be because there just wasn't anything else like that. Well, I started walking again, and here come the footsteps again. Right along there with me. They were a little farther up on my left now, almost directly to my left, where before they were angled back a little bit. And I started walking very quickly toward this area. I'm thinking if I can just get up about 100 yards in front of this thing, I could take off running and maybe make it down to this closest condominium, which was about 200 yards ahead by then. There was a swimming pool right next to it with a very lighted area, and I wanted to get into the lights and get over there by people. And as I was walking along, I saw that the tree line kind of merged very close to the trail up ahead, which meant if this thing followed the tree line, it was going to be right up on me. So at some point, I just decided I got to run now. And as soon as I took off running, what horrified me was it started running right with me. And I thought at that point, I couldn't believe how fast I was running. I thought, oh, there's nothing that can catch me. But this thing was bearing down on me. I could hear it getting closer, and the heaviness of the footsteps just horrified me. I didn't dare look over my shoulder because I didn't want to see it. And I got up to this lighted area, and the trees, like I said, got very close there, and they curled around and to this group of oaks that got right up to the trail. It was pitch black in there. And when I got halfway down the slope, I just turned around. I had to just see what was coming on me. And it stopped right in this group of oaks right next to the trail, pitch black in there. Just stopped right in there. You could hear it. And I got so mad, I tried to walk up on it. Actually, I tried to walk up on it once back by that lake. I just got very angry because I was so terrified. It just made me angry. And for a moment, I tried to walk up on it. But after about 4 steps, something was screaming inside me, "Don't go," And the same thing at that area that was lit up. I tried walking up on it. I got so mad. I just couldn't do it. And it just stayed there. So I saw some people coming out from the condominium, a young couple down by the pool, and I just ran down half hysterical and started blurting out this crazy stuff. Hey, has anybody been scared off from these trails around here or had any bad experiences at night? And they just looked at me and smiled, and walked off. And as they were walking away, I said, how come the maintenance crew hasn't been keeping this place up? Thinking maybe something happened with them. And they just kept walking. So I got a drink of water from this water fountain, and I was trying to get my head together, and I just said, this just can't be. This is just there's no way this can be. And I know it sounds crazy, but at that time in my life, I had this, this belief system that, this was my realm. Nothing was going to deter me from the plans I set out on. There was no way I was going to go through this condominium development up to State Road 84 and have to take this long detour 3 miles out of the way to get back to where my car was at my buddy's. And I says, this is crazy. This can't be. I've been out here, this just can't be. There's got to be an explanation. Maybe I'm imagining this, all kind of things were going through my head. And I noticed that the condominium that was by me jutted south quite a ways, and I said, well, geez, if I go around the back of this thing, maybe I can sneak through and duck low and come out by that lake, and I'll be 200 yards ahead of this thing, and I can just jog right through the woods and get back in the orange groves before it knows what's happening, because I had no knowledge of these things at the time. And interestingly enough, I think it was already back there in the area that it followed me from. So here I go, sneaking around this condominium, ducking low, looking over my shoulder to the right, back where I thought it was. And the whole time I must have been running right toward it. And as I got by the lake, I was sneaking up on a trail, looking over my right to hear if I could hear footsteps or anything coming. I didn't hear anything, and I thought, I got it. I pulled it over on this thing, And I start walking really quick down the trail back from the way I came to the south, looking over my shoulder to the right. Well, here comes this crashing running right out of the brush, farther down from where it started chasing me before, but it was already running toward me. And I just bolted for my life, That's what I just thought I was going to get ate up. That's the feeling I had, that I was just literally going to be ate up alive. And I ran, and I didn't stop running, I don't think, until halfway to State Road 84. And when I finally got back to my buddy's house and saw my car, I'll just tell you guys right now, I think I almost cried. I was looking across the street just knowing I was going to hear these footsteps running toward me again. And I pulled myself together, and I got into my buddy's house. I had been jogging off and on for a couple of miles by then. And I thought I'd just tell him I'm tired, get some iced tea, and go home. Well, my buddy's fiance, she knew right away something happened. She says, "My God, Darren, what happened?" And I says, "Oh, nothing." She goes, "Don't lie to me, boy. Something happened to you. I can tell." And I just didn't really know what to say. I said, "Oh, I had a little scare out there on the ridge." Well, my buddy's dad sat up in his chair because he was one of those tough cowboy types, and he didn't believe in men being scared. And he started asking me questions. And, "What do you mean something scared you? What are you talking about? You know, what was out there, you know?" And I says, and then he says, "No, you know, what would scare you? You've been out there, you know." I just said, "I think I just got chased by a skunk ape." And then, you know, the disbelief, and he took me to task over it right in front of these ladies. And that's basically why I just never said anything for almost 20-some years.
Everyone here at Bigfoot Hotspot Radio would like to thank Audible.com. Audible.com is the internet leading provider of audiobooks with over 150,000 different titles to choose from. To download a free audiobook of your choice, go to audibletrial.com/Bigfoot Hotspot. Hey, Vic, how are you?
I'm doing good, and you?
Doing pretty good. I got Will on the line with us.
Oh, hey, Will.
Hi, Vic. How you doing?
I'm doing really good, and you?
Not bad.
Good. Hey, just so you know, it's kind of ironic. I'm working my way through one of your books right now as we speak.
Oh. Which one are you reading?
I'm a big fan. Notes from the Field.
Oh, that was my first one. That's actually the best of the three that are currently out, I think.
Oh, really?
That was my first one. That was my first attempt at writing, so.
I like it. It's a good book. I bought all three books. It's the first one I started on. I saw that it was number one, so I thought I'd work my way through them.
Oh, very nice. Well, thanks for buying it.
Oh, anytime. It's a good read.
Vic, before I play this audio of Shane encountering the Sasquatch, will you walk us back through this encounter and kind of describe to us what's going on?
Sure. Well, to start at the beginning, Shane McMahon and I hosted a Squatch-based blog talk radio show called Campfire Shadows a few years ago. A few years before that, he encountered what he described to me as being an 8-foot-plus tall Sasquatch at very close quarters. I wasn't there to personally witness these events unfold. All I can do is relay to you some of the particulars Shane shared with me before he passed away about a year ago. On October 22nd, 2008, Shane, a man named Jim, and a lady named Vicky were way out in the sticks of Alabama doing a live broadcast from the field for the show. When the recording you're about to hear starts playing, the three of them have just moved a short distance from the campfire. They're standing about 15 yards from each other and are watching tall, dark shapes moving around over by the campfire and where their vehicles are parked. Because of all the activity that was going on over there, they failed to notice what was going on much closer to them. Now, before you roll the tape, Wes, I want to explain one last thing. Jim, whose nickname is Bear, was Shane's safety blanket. That's why you're going to hear Shane call out for him time after time when Shane finally realizes that an 8-foot-plus tall Squatch is standing just 10 feet from him. It wasn't until Bear and Vicky had slowly come up behind Shane that he finally started to calm down a little bit because he didn't feel quite so alone.
Yeah, no, that's what I was thinking too. There's more than one up there.
Do you guys have flashlights out there?
We're not. No, we're not. We don't use flashlights because we're not trying to, kind of piss them off.
Right.
Because I think at this point, it's safe to say we're probably outnumbered. It's right there, right in front of me, 10 feet. It's looking right at me.
Are you okay?
It's like 10 feet in front of me. It's looking right. I think I'm about to have a heart attack.
Are you okay?
Bear?
What's going on?
This thing is the biggest goddamn thing I've ever seen in my life.
Deep breath again.
Bear, this thing's 10 feet in front of me. These things are the boldest sons of bitches I've ever seen. This thing's not even, it's just looking right at me, staring at me. I mean, just mind-boggling.
You all right?
I just can't believe the thing's just sitting there looking. I mean, Vicky's standing right here by me. And
I got the video cam going.
No, please, don't, please. I don't want to, please.
If you go back and you listen to the Campfire Shadows, the show that Vic and Shane had, I've never heard Shane that shook up. I mean, he's really shook up in that audio.
Yeah, he was definitely a cool, calm customer normally.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to, to fake that kind of emotion. That's pretty strong.
No doubt. It was really neat to find out when I came into the picture with hosting Campfire Shadows with Shane. It was after I found out about that, what happened there. It was neat to be able to talk to Shane and really find out some of the particulars about what was going on. When you hear him start to say, don't, from what I understand, Vicky was about to turn on a flashlight. She thought that would calm him down a little more, and he was terrified that if she did flip that beam on, that Squatch would maybe rip their heads off or something.
Did he ever say why he thought that or felt that way?
Well, that Squatch, he kind of alludes to it when he talks about it being bold. What was going on was the other two were 15 yards away from him, as it was explained to me. And since he was the closest by far to that Squatch, it was just glaring at him, staring laser beams through his soul, he said. That's how he described it to me. Like I said earlier, once Bear and Vicky edged their way up behind him, it took a lot longer for them to edge up to him than what that recording made it seem like. But once they got closer to him, he didn't quite feel like he was out on an island so much, so that calmed him down a little bit at least.
Yeah, I can certainly understand that feeling of that penetrating stare. I had the same thing happen to me the first time I stood in front of two of these things.
Did he say how big the Sasquatch was? Did he say the size of it?
Yeah, he did describe it to me. That was one of the first questions I asked him. Where he was standing was on the dirt road, from what I understand, that led into where they had camped. And he was standing right on the edge of the road, and when he realized the Squatch was there, it was standing next to a tree that was, the Squatch was standing in a little depression-like ditch or something like that. The Squatch's feet, he told me, were about a foot or more below where Shane's feet were. When he looked up at the Squatch's eyes, he said the Squatch was a little over a foot taller still than what he was. That's where the whole 8+ foot Squatch description came to be from.
Did Shane tell you that? Did the Sasquatches just eventually go away, or what kind of happened after that? Did he?
If I remember right, I think he looked away for just a second, and then when he turned his attention back, it was gone.
Jesus, and he told you that he thought there was like 10 of them around him that night, or around that whole camp that night?
That's what he thought, but he told me he wasn't really sure how many there were. They were moving around so much, and where they were, it was so dark where they were that it was really hard to know exactly how many there were. But that was his best guess, was that there were maybe 10.
And were they doing anything to draw them in, or did they just come in on top of them? Like Will's had a lot of stories where they just kind of came out on them. But were they doing anything to kind of draw them in?
Well, Shane told me that Bear had done a call. He was well known for having a call or two that was supposed to be very effective at bringing them in. I've talked to several people that have been out with Bear and also with Coonbo, a gentleman, Tim Coonbo Baker. Those two were and are really good friends. I've talked to a lot of people who have been out with those two, and they vehemently vouch for their ability to be able to call them in. That's what I was told had happened. It's not using whoop whoop, is it? I'm just joking. No, no, it's not. The call, just so you know, to kind of answer your question a little better, Bear, where he grew up, he says that there was a lot of activity, loads of Squatch activity, and over the years, as he grew up and heard the various calls so often, he said he just basically learned to mimic those calls. He would experiment with different calls. Some calls didn't get a reaction at all when he would go out squatching. Other calls proved to be pretty reliable. That's what he had done. He claims that he had done, Shane said that Bear had done one of those almost foolproof calls.
Interesting. Well, we appreciate you sharing it with us, Vic. Appreciate you listening, too. I mean, that was really cool audio.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one. Thanks for having me. I thought that a lot of people would be interested in hearing that.
Oh, yeah, no, we sure appreciate it. That's, that incident reminded me so much of the one we had back in 1976 out near Fort Lewis, where 4 of us were out and surrounded by a group of them most of the night. A very, very similar kind of a situation.
I can put myself in his position, and, you look up. That's why I kind of cut out some of the audio from the 2 female hosts, because, they were telling them to experience the moment and blah, blah, blah. But when you're standing 10 feet from one of these things, you're looking at them. Experience the moment really isn't the first thing on your mind.
That.
Yeah, exactly.
I experienced the moment, and I think my underwear did too.
You know what, Will? Hearing that unfold, I've been thinking about that over the past couple of days, and I heard your comments on one of the episodes where a caller asked you if you thought that Squatches were dangerous and should be treated that way. Well, on that note, on that topic, I've talked to a lot of Squatchers, having hosted Campfire Shadows like I used to do. I can't tell you how many of them I actually heard say, well, I'd do anything. I'd cut off a toe if I could encounter a Squatch. Well, if they could have traded places with Shane that night when he had an 8-footer 10 feet away from him, I wonder if their opinion would have changed at that moment,
There's 2 types of people out there, the ones that have experienced seeing one of these things and those that haven't. When you talk to people, I can't think of anybody that I've ever spoken with, myself included, that have seen one of these things up close that would really want to go out and look for one. So people that haven't seen them that want to experience that, but once you have experienced it, it's not something, if I had my choice to go back and do, that I would repeat.
I definitely agree with that.
I mean, you don't know, it's like Wes said, be careful what you wish for.
I'd say, well, keep in mind, Shane claims he had seen a Squatch before, nothing ever that close. But he said one time he did dress up in a ghillie suit where he lived in Wisconsin and went way out into the sticks, into this area that he had put a lot of time into looking for these things, and he basically hid out in some bushes along this game trail. He says that he laid out there all day, and then when the sun started to fall, it was pretty much dusk. He claims that a Squatch came walking up that trail, and once it got pretty close, I don't know the distance, but he told me that once it got within a certain range, it just stopped, like something was wrong, and it started sniffing the air like it could smell him somehow. He didn't have cologne on or anything like that, but he said that it acted like it could smell that something was wrong. And the next thing you know, it turned around and beat feet back the direction it had come.
Are you familiar with the old Bob Titmus story, where he was in the Bluff Creek area not far from where the Patterson film site was a few years before that happened? He was camped up there, and he was out, off in across country and lost track of time, so he figured it was more dangerous to go back to his camp through the timber in the dark than it would be just to hunker down. So he dug a shallow hole, got in it, covered himself with leaves all but his face, and he dozed kind of on and off. And around what he figured was about 1 o'clock in the morning, he heard something heavy coming through the timber, and that's exactly what this creature started doing, started sniffing as if it knew he was there someplace but couldn't find him. And it started tearing timber up and screaming and raising holy hell. And then he said that shortly before daylight, it left the area. So after a while, he got brave enough and got out of the hole, and he went and looked, and he said it looked like a bulldozer had gone through there. Very, very similar kind of incident. So I think occasionally that is what happens. Maybe there's something about people. I know from my time in the military, you're out in field conditions after a while, and you can smell things that you normally wouldn't smell.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, you kind of become more attuned. We, as human beings, we're noisy, we're smelly. We do a lot of things that we think are maybe quiet or low key, but really, to wild creatures or not, we come out, like bulldozers into the forest, and everything knows we're dangerous, so they run. That's why we don't see a lot of wild animals. And when it comes to hunting, it's a real practiced art to be able to get close to wildlife.
I don't know how accurate it is, but I can't remember where I recently discovered this, but some anthropologist made a comment about one of the primitive hominids, how this particular hominid had a sense of smell that was almost as acute as a bloodhound's. I don't know how that could be, considering the shape of a hominid's face and its small nose, but that's what they claimed. I just wonder if maybe Squatches have a sense of smell that's almost as cute. I don't know.
I don't think so, because, and it could be a type of primate that had a longer snout, because just like a dog, the reason a dog can smell so well is because they have that long snout. The more snout, the better, because all those nerve receptors are there. They have lots of them that line that area. And as scent particles come in, they get drug over all those, so the brain has more time to process that and pick up, very minute particles. Where primates, they look what gorillas do. When they want to smell something, they put it right up in their face. And I know a number of instances where Sasquatches were seen smelling things, and they put it right up in their face because they have that flat nose. I think it's more of a case if a person's in the area, either, like you said, either cologne, deodorant, soap that clothes are washed in, could be anything. They might pick up that minute particle or noise or something that maybe we think we're being quiet or low-key, and it's something they could pick up.
That makes sense.
The behavior of a Sasquatch reminds me of a kind of a chimpanzee's behavior. I would say more than a gorilla's behavior. All the behaviors you hear are more chimp-like. The throwing rocks, the throwing tantrums. Reminds
I have
me
an
more.
anthropologist friend who was actually commenting on that with me recently, that the behaviors are very much more like chimps.
Yeah, and that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Is you hear about these different behaviors. Throwing rocks. It just the whole tantrums they seem to throw when they're pissed. Just reminds me of like a chimp out there.
And they have very short tempers, which is a primate feature. Gorillas, they talk, you see these people or hear about them wanting to go up and do the Dian Fossey thing with Sasquatch as well. Unless you're an expert at it, you can't get to gorillas that way either. You could be torn up by the dominant male of a particular group. You just don't go do that. These things have short tempers. Many other primate species have very short tempers too.
If they do have tempers short, if their fuse is as short as a chimp, that's really scary considering how big and strong they seem to be.
Absolutely.
Not good.
Absolutely. And you see case after case after case where that's demonstrated. I mean, oftentimes, it cuts off just short of violence, but, they do mock charges like gorillas do. One of what I call a classic, in my work anyway, a guy I interviewed back in 1988 in the Columbia River Gorge who encountered a Sasquatch. It charged him. He was scared to death, so he just stood his ground. And it was probably lucky for him because the Sasquatch broke off the charge when it got to about 10 feet in front of him. Stood there. They looked at each other for a few moments. He said then it kind of looked bored and turned and walked off into the forest. Then he went and changed his underwear and all that. But, But, those things happen. I mean, it's like the two that I encountered now. They were just there. I'm sure they heard me coming, through the tree limbs and things. That was not a happy experience, certainly for me, and they didn't look happy, just like, Shane, the stare that both of them gave me was very penetrating, and it was not a happy encounter. I think had I not had a rifle in my hands and shot in the air, they may have done more than they did. Fortunately, I was able to take off running.
Yeah, it's funny, like on our encounter, the one that was in the tree, the more I look back on it, the more I think of like chimp-type behavior, the way it was kind of shifting, and what you can hear it in Shane's voice too. I mean, it sounds like he's going to break down in tears. Either break down in tears or get down in the fetal position and start sucking his thumb.
And some people go into that state of fear with these things.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. How could you not?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, unless you're Rick Dyer.
That's another show, isn't it?
Yeah,
oh, Lord. I don't know if we want to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah, that rabbit hole's been gone down too many times. But, Dick, what got you interested in doing a Bigfoot show and getting into Sasquatch? I mean, what kind of got you interested in the whole thing?
Well, I've always been interested in talking Squatch, everything to do with Squatches. When I was really young, even, I was reading, had my nose in, I can't tell you how many books to do with the topic. I had been listening to Campfire Shadows. I listened to it for about a year or two when the people that you heard, Wes, that were hosting the show had been hosting it. Well, something happened where they weren't going to be able to host the show anymore, and the topic came up, well, who out there would want to host the show with Shane or would be a good replacement for the people that had left? Some of the people that knew me that were also listeners like I was, they posed the idea, well, what about Vic? I think he might do a pretty good job. So they asked me about it, and I said, well, sure. I jumped at the chance, and the rest was history. On my personal end, I might have had a couple of Class B encounters. I never have seen a Squatch. there might have been a couple of times where I was a lot closer to one than I would have hoped. I'm not one of these people that encountered a Squatch that didn't have any interest in the topic until that fateful day, and then next thing you know, they're just head over heels about the topic.
Appreciate you being on the show, coming on the show, sharing your audio with us and talking with us. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Interesting stuff. I mean, good guy.
Yeah, not really nice guy. Let me see where this was at. I got something funny for it to play for you.
You know, one thing about, Shane's encounter where Vic was talking about how long he saw the creature, he turned his head for a moment and then looked back and it was gone. When we had our encounter back in 1976, almost the exact same thing happened. We had the creatures. There were 4 of them there. We knew there were 4 because we could hear them screaming, and we could hear that were a little farther away from the camp, and 2 that were just kind of circling the camp. At one point, we, of course, to protect ourselves, we had kind of a one crappy flashlight with 4 batteries, and so we built the fire up really big, and that seemed to keep them at bay. At one point, I said, well, let's all face out, with our backs against the fire, all 4 directions, so we can keep an eye on what's going on. If anything comes in, we'll see it. One of my friends, who was the opposite side behind me, wanted to tell me something, so I turned around, kind of turned my head so I could hear him, and he told me whatever he was going to tell me, and he looked back, and he just wigged the rest of it out. He yelled out at the top of his lungs, holy. By the time we turned around, we didn't see anything, and I said, what happened? He says, well, I turned back after I told you whatever. This thing was standing right behind the tent. The tent was 6 feet tall. This thing was another 2 feet above that, just glaring right at him. And it was maybe, 8, 9 feet away. By the time when he yelled, he said it just stepped back into the darkness. So it was just like that incident where, you look at it one moment, you turn away or do whatever, and they step back into the darkness, they're gone.
Yeah, I've heard that time and time again from people, where they say, hey, I just turned away for a second, and when I look back, it was gone.
Right.
And I wonder if it'd be kind of interesting to see if other primates do that same type of behavior. When you make eye contact with them, with people's encounters, they seem to just stay there. And the minute that people turn away, they take off.
What's interesting about eye contact, something a lot of my Indian friends have said, is they always say, don't make eye contact with one if you see one out in the wild somewhere. It's supposed to be bad luck or even, fatal if you were to stare at one or make eye contact with one. There is something with other primates where they can be aggressive if you make eye contact with them. So there must be something to that.
Yeah, I've heard gorillas do that. When you make eye contact with gorillas, they take it as a challenge.
They can attack, right? See, that's the thing with primates. Everybody talks about all these different things. With primates, all primates, eyesight and hearing are the 2 top senses of all the things that primates use, and eyesight's the big one. So, we look at, and even humans do it with each other, we look at all these minute body language and visual cues, and it tells us things. And other primates are the same way. They look at all those different postures and for whatever cues, and I'm assuming, to see whether something's a threat or friend or whatever.
Yeah, you're right. I think even humans do that. When you walk down the street and you see someone staring at you, you kind of stop and you kind of figure out what's going. Is this going to be a threat or what's this guy's problem?
Exactly. What's going on here?
No, I wanted to play this for you. Did you hear about this other guy that claims to have shot a Sasquatch out in Maryland?
I don't think so.
Yeah, his name's Mark Schell, and he lives in Maryland. This is kind of funny because, so here's what he posted on YouTube, and then I'll play the second part that's even funnier.
For all you non-believers, maybe it's time you start believing. I shot this one out near Gunpowder Falls in Maryland, just south or downstream of the reservoir. There was a couple others a lot bigger than this one here. This one is stopped. I was able to get a nice clean shot with 30-06. Took it right down. Sasquatch.
Oh, man. 30-06. I shot it down. Sasquatch.
Shot it down.
Yeah. What's funny is that was his second take. He accidentally posted the first take. Here's the first take.
Oh, no.
For those of you non-believers, maybe it's time you start believing.
Yeah, he accidentally posted that. I guess it's funnier if you watch the video because he's trying to what he shows. I was going to post on Facebook, but it's not even worth. It's like Rick Dyer Jr. It's not even worth posting on Facebook. But it looks like he shot a rat, and the rat's laying there in the snow. It might even be like his mom's coat, but
And, some of these jokers, they put funny things up there, but I'm thinking, okay, what's the point of all that? I mean, that's kind of juvenile.
Yeah, it's retarded. You think if you shot a Sasquatch, your first thing wouldn't be, hey, I'll slam this up on YouTube. But it's funny because
what's the motivation?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we talked about that before about, if somebody sees one or would, take the next step and actually shoot one, usually the reaction is you don't want to tell anybody. So when somebody comes out and makes some big claim, and we know a couple like that in the past year or two, you have to ask yourself, what's the motivation for this person coming out making these claims? What do they want from this? Where usually a real witness, you have to practically drag it out of them to get them to talk.
Yeah. Shot one. Sasquatch.
I got him.
Yeah.
I got him. You want him.
And what's funny is if he had actually done his homework, he says, oh, well, there was a bunch of them around there, but I shot this one. It was the smallest. He would know that. He would be walking up on the body.
No, the other ones would have either had him or taken the little one or both.
Everyone here at Bigfoot Hotspot Radio would like to thank Audible.com. Audible.com is the internet leading provider of audiobooks with over 150,000 different titles to choose from. To download a free audiobook of your choice, go to audibletrial.com/Bigfoot Hotspot.
Well, this will kind of appeal to our Southern California fans. And, as happens all too often, I don't have the source of where this information came from. It was a piece written by two individuals, Ken Hulsey, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, and Terry Presley. And they start out by describing Bigfoot creatures in Southern California, and they say, huge, scary, aggressive, fast, and threatening. These terms are used to describe several Bigfoot-like creatures said to inhabit the desert regions of Southern California. The mysterious giant apes go by many different names: the Borrego, Sandman, the Speedway Monster, Zoobies, Devils, and the Yucca Man. And what's interesting about this, I never used to think much of, any claims from Southern California, but last summer I was flown to L.A. to do a piece for the Sci-Fi Channel, and they took me out into the Angeles National Forest, and I'm sure locals in Southern California know this, but many others don't. There's some pretty rugged mountains east of Los Angeles, and not very far east, that are timbered. So I was impressed when I went there. I thought, wow, there really could be one or two wandering around this country. But what is also interesting is, the history of the Sasquatch being talked about to non-Indian peoples go back a good 300 years. The first Spanish missionary was actually, or his first Spanish mission was established in 1769 in the San Diego area. But Spanish missionaries had been in that area many, many years before that time. And local Indians often told them stories about these wild men. So I'll just, if you can bear with me, I'll read through some of this. It's pretty interesting, where they talk about the local Gabrielino Indians, and I'm sure I butchered that, told the Padres about hairy devils that lived nearby. In fact, according to written accounts, the Indians lived in fear of these large, foul-smelling wild men and refused to go anywhere near the reported home called Towas Puki, which means Camp of the Devil, on the southern bank of the Santa Ana River, which is very, very similar to the stories from the 1840s that come out of the Mount St. Helens area. Same thing, local Indians talked about the hairy giant cannibals that lived in the Mount St. Helens area that would eat Indians, and they couldn't even be bribed to lead anyone to that area. The history goes back quite a ways.
It's interesting that they called them devils, and it makes me, when they call them devils, I almost wonder if, how they name different parts of the country, like
right.
Devil's Canyon or Devil's Peak.
It makes you wonder about the origins of those names.
Yeah, exactly. But I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead, Will.
Oh, no problem. Well, this first one, like I said, I'm just gonna kind of read through some of these. Are very interesting. The first one is concerning an area called Dead Men's Hole near Holcomb Village, just west of the Anza Borrego Desert State Park, was a water stop on the old stagecoach lines during the mid to late 1800s, and is reported site of several alleged murders blamed on Bigfoot. In 1876, one of the passengers who ventured out of the safety of the coach while its horses stopped to take a drink reported seeing a large, naked, hairy thing watching him from behind some scruff. After that, several people met their demise at this same site. either strangled or beaten to death by an unknown person or thing. They blamed the monster, of course, regardless of the fact whether or not it actually killed them. In April 1876, San Diego Union reported an encounter with a missing link near Warner's Ranch, also west of Anza Borrego, by a young man named Turner Helm. So he said, according to Helm, the creature had dark fur like a bear and a face like an American or a Spaniard. And as this goes on, in March 1888, two local hunters, Charles Cox and Edward Dean, set out to hunt down the monster and finally put an end to the murders. According to the San Diego Daily Transcript, the pair found and killed what they were looking for. The creature described as a gorilla with the face of an Indian and fangs like a bear. The creature's body was to be transported to San Diego, where it was to be put on public display, but mysteriously disappeared before arrival. Reportedly, in 1939, a prospector who was interviewed in the 1970s, wished to remain anonymous, was attacked by a large group of upright walking apes. As he camped near the Borrego sink, frightened men described the creatures as very large, covered with white fur with glowing red eyes. The only thing he said that saved him was the fact that the monsters were afraid of his campfire. And we moved on. There was actually a large number of sightings beginning in the mid-1960s. Saga magazine had an article titled America's Terrifying Woodland Monster Men, dated 1969. An excerpt from that story says that gold prospectors and treasure hunters frequently seek their lost bonanzas in isolated areas. Since 1964, treasure hunters in the Borrego Valley Desert in California have whispered about the abominable Sandmen of Borrego. The arid area is near the Mexican border. It is virtually uninhabited. There are many fissures, caves, and crevasses in the Superstition Mountain region, and proctors say the Cocopa Indians told of a subterranean labyrinth under the mountain. Major Victor Stoyanov was seeking an access into the Superstition Hills in January 1964 when he noticed large humanoid tracks in the sand dunes. The prints ran in pairs generally parallel and averaged about 14 inches in length and 9 inches wide in the instep. Major Stoyanov declared he returned to the desert on several other occasions, made plaster casts of the prints, and snapped photographs. He was quoted as saying, "Curious as I am, I hope that the person who discovers what kind of beast this is doesn't happen to be me."
Don't you think it's interesting that you don't hear any gifting stories? You don't hear anybody like that one lady.
And that's exactly it. I mean, none of the accounts here are the fuzzy, warm stories that some of these people like to think about the Sasquatch. And you can go through much, and I'm familiar with a lot of the history of the subject, and none of the stories are the warm, fuzzy ones. I don't know where people come up with that stuff. It's nonsense. It is not part of what this subject is.
Yeah, it just amazes me because when you go back through history, you don't, and I've read the article that you actually sent it to me, Will, and I went through it. You don't hear any sharing gifts with Sasquatch. These are friendly forest people. You don't hear any of the happy-go-lucky stories. It's always, they're usually called devils, or they usually tear you apart, or
cannibals or something. Yeah, they're always very fear-inspiring, either names or accounts. The behaviors are never friendly, and it's whether the people involved are doing anything to, instigate that kind of behavior or not. It says, Harold Lancaster, treasure hunter, was prospecting in the Borrego Sink east of the settlement of Borrego Springs, California in July 1968 when he saw a Sandman. Apparently Sandman was one of the common names in that area for these creatures. He said, I was camped on a mesa one morning when I saw a man walking in the desert. He reported the figure came closer and I thought it was another prospector. Then I picked up my binoculars and saw the strangest sight in my life. It was a real giant ape man, Lancaster said. I had heard about the screaming giant ape men up in Tulum County that frightened people for a couple of years. Another person and I even went up to look for the thing. I decided it was a hoax, never expecting to actually see one. As the Sandman drew closer, Lancaster became worried. That thing was big. I was no match for it. He reported, I had only a .22 pistol on my hip, and it would have been like shooting at a gorilla with a pea shooter. I was afraid the beast might get too close, so I fired a couple of rounds in the air. The Sandman jumped a good 3 feet off the ground, and when the sounds of the shots reached him, he turned his head toward me and then took off running in the other direction.
The gentleman in that story, he was pretty smart, shooting in the air instead of at the creature.
And I can see that, because in my own first encounter, I had my .22 rifle. I knew that what was standing in front of me was far too large to do anything except piss it off. Being smart, I shot in the air, hoping that maybe it would scare it away instead it brought the other one in. But so what? It wasn't so smart. If the other one was behind me, had I not had a rifle, what would have been the outcome of that situation. I don't like to think about that.
Easy picking.
So in 1964, a father and son found themselves being pelted by rocks by a shaggy creature while hiking near Escondido. Later that same summer, a juvenile sandman was implicated in the death of 3 cows on the MGM ranch near Jamul, west of Anza Borrego. This time the creature left behind plenty of large human-like tracks in the soft dirt. Okay, then we go into what was called the Dragway Monster. I believe that was, maybe I often a little, but the city of Fontana has had a long and glorious history associated with auto racing. As most of you probably know, the city is the present home of the Auto Club Speedway, which holds a yearly major NASCAR race along with other racing events of different types. What many of you may not know is back in the 1950s, there was a drag strip in the area that was considered one of the best in the country. The Mickey Thompson's Fontana International Dragway lasted for almost 2 decades before a series of fatal accidents forced it to close in 1972. The area is now a housing tract known as the Village of Heritage and lies about a mile east of Edawanda Boulevard on the north side of Foothill Boulevard. These race events took place for 2 decades, attracting legions of die-hard race fans. They also attracted a very curious monster. The height of these sightings took place in the early 1960s when race patrons would regularly spot a giant, hairy, Bigfoot-like creature crossing a field adjacent to the track in full view of the grandstands. Bigfoot monster had been so regularly that it earned the name Speedway Monster. Though witnessed by hundreds of people, no one ever worked up the courage to investigate it. It is hard to speculate why a creature known for being reclusive and shy of humans would trek so close to the racetrack, filled with people, and not to mention the loud noise produced by the cars. One can only assume that it was curious about what all the fuss was about, or more likely that the creature was making plans to rummage through the trash cans for leftover burgers and hot dogs after everyone cleared out, which is very, very likely because these guys, in many cases I've known where they've gone through rummaging through garbage areas.
I think it's funny how we as humans give name to these creatures based on what's nearby, like Grassman, or in this case it's called the Speedway Monster.
When I was a little boy, out behind the town of Ording, Washington, we had the county rock quarry. My dad worked for the county, and they quarried that granite to line the river so they wouldn't flood. The kid that came to our house that night in 1968 called that one the rock quarry monster. Yeah. And also, when they talk about in this article about, the monster coming near all these people in the grandstands, I've heard other stories around Yakult, and the town of Yakult, they have the baseball field in town there. There was an account, at least one that I know of, where there were several hundred people in those stands, kids playing baseball, and one of these things came right up in midday behind this group of people, and they all turned and saw it standing there. And it just kind of, looked at it, and then it turned around and walked away.
Yeah, that doesn't shock me in Yakult. They're pretty ballsy out there.
Yeah, they are. Goes on and says, in July of 1965, the monster attacked a young boy as he walked home. According to the account, the creature surprised the lad by jumping out from behind some bushes. As he tried to escape from the monster, his clothes were torn to shreds. The child managed to get loose and run away. The monster reportedly did not give chase. In August 27th that same year, a woman named Jerry Mendenhall was attacked while in her parked car on a residential street in Fontana by a mud-covered monster that smelled like a dead animal. The creature reportedly grabbed her through the open driver's side window, frightened the young woman, put the car in gear, and stepped on the gas and escaped, leaving the monster in the dust.
There was an encounter in Washington where a little boy was riding down a trail, and a Sasquatch had actually jumped out of the brush at him in front of the kid and had growled at this kid. And he reportedly got back on his bike, hysterically rode off, and the Sasquatch didn't give chase. People say these creatures aren't threatened by women, aren't threatened by children, which may be true some of the time, but not always.
Exactly. And there's you always find pieces in different areas, different regions, different time periods that are similar to others. Like this one, it's just in 1991, a Fontana resident, John Davis, reported that hairy creature on 2 legs raided his chicken pen, and we've heard stories just like that. Then they go back here back in the 1800s, an area between what is now the towns of Luverne and Pomona near Fontana was known to local Indians as Toy Biped. I'm not sure how they pronounce that, but it meant that devil woman who was there reported to be the hunting ground of a local female Bigfoot. This one is kind of interesting. It's like the military story we had on Fort Lewis where the guy was left with the truck. This is on a cold February night, 1971. A wood guard manned a post outside an armory on the outskirts of a Marine base near 29 Palms. Without warning, the otherwise unearthly quiet was suddenly shattered when a large mass appeared out of the dark desert landscape. The guard raised his rifle and commanded the being to halt. Much to the young man's surprise, the large figure did not stop, but instead charged right at him at an inhuman rate. As the figure drew closer, the Marine realized what was approaching rapidly was not a man at all, but a huge, upright, running, hair-covered creature. Paralyzed by shock, the young guard stood his ground, too frightened to move. The mysterious creature threw the young man to the ground, rendering him unconscious. When the guard's relief arrived several hours later, they found him almost incoherent with his rifle nearly bent in two. After the incident, both CIA and the FBI were contacted to conduct an investigation. Much to their surprise, the locals were more than eager to tell their stories about giant man-beasts in the area. In fact, the very same night as the attack on the guard, two creatures had been seen roaming through a neighborhood relatively close to the base. When a local couple looked out of their front window to see what was upsetting their dog, they saw the two yucca men crossing the front lawn. Then sometime later, the same creatures were seen near a horse corral some distance away. The investigation also revealed that several employees at the Joshua Tree National Monument had seen Bigfoot-like creatures on numerous occasions.
A lot of people talk about these creatures being close to, Indian reservations or military bases. And when they talk about Indian reservations, I've heard people say, well, they have a long relationship with these creatures and blah, blah, blah. But when you think about an Indian reservation or even like a military base, they're usually in remote locations. They're
Absolutely.
not. And I think that is why a lot of these creatures around military bases or around Indian reservations, because I know here in Washington and Oregon, they're in remote locations. They're away from everyone else. They're not in town. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and most people don't understand, and Indian reservations are very much like those military reservations in that, the people that inhabit those places kind of stay in core areas. Not many of them really venture out often into, the expanses that those reservations occupy. Fort Lewis is a good example. The main post is kind of a tiny area, and it's surrounded by all these huge tracts of forest. And when people are out there, the troops usually occupy kind of the same areas, which are usually tank trails, or they have certain training areas that they occupy. But people aren't out there every single day. So there's a lot of places for wildlife to come in, and they can move through those places fairly unmolested or even totally unnoticed. And the same is true with a lot of the big Indian reservations.
It's not like you can go out there and pop up a shot without going to jail or going to the Indian jail,
Right. I know when we went back in 2003 to the Klamath Reservation in Southern Oregon, that was an eye-opener. That's a pretty large chunk of land. The director of the Cultural Committee was taking us out he was showing us around, some of the areas where things had been reported seeing, and some of those folks lived a long way out there. And, herds of cattle were roaming. We'd had to actually stop at one point. There were hundreds of cattle that were kind of milling slowly across the road. And he says, well, we have to wait until they go by. But there weren't any fences there, and people were spread a long way from one another. And they just had these giant areas where, in fact, speaking of that same area, another friend from the Klamath tribe was telling me he used to bring me salmon every year. He says they got their allotment every year, and they didn't like salmon, so he'd give me his allotment. But he was telling me they went on a hunting party one year, and he said there were probably, somewhere between 10 and 20 of us, and they had to drive a whole day to get to the first camp. And when they left the first camp, they went on foot from there to the second camp, the more remote camp. So this was a long, long way out from any sort of civilization. And he said when they got out to this second camp, and I don't remember exactly what the details were about how this Sasquatch came upon them, but there was at least one, maybe two. One of them was a big gray one, and it actually attacked them. This group of Indians, and he says, some of us had automatic weapons and everything, and everybody was so scared. They were shooting up in the air and making all this noise while this thing was circling and menacing them, and finally they took off running, just, scared to death for the first camp where they could get to their trucks and get the hell out of there. And he says, we were scared to death the whole time, and not knowing who was not going to make it back.
Wow, so it was an unprovoked attack?
Exactly, absolutely unprovoked.
Wow.
There's more that goes on in Southern California than meets the eye. So, for our folks that live in that area, I hope that was interesting. It's fascinating what I've read through some of these articles.
Yeah, it is pretty fascinating. I didn't realize that they had that much going on down there. What, do they have a lot of pine trees down there?
Mostly pine.
Yeah, mostly pine. That's what I thought. That was definitely interesting. I'm sure a lot of people in the Southern California area will, anytime you hear about it, it's always more fascinating to hear encounters by your area. Whenever I look up encounters, I usually first go to Washington because it's the state I'm from. I had no idea they had that much going on down there. I didn't even know there was that much forest in that area.
I didn't either until I went there last summer, as I mentioned, for the Sci-Fi Channel. And they took me out there, and I thought, wow, it was actually, very rugged, very high mountains. I'm not sure what to compare it with, but it's every bit as comparable to, the Cascade Mountains, some of those peaks down there. Maybe not as high as, of course, not as high as things like Mount Rainier or Hood or some of those, but, very rugged mountains for sure.
Yeah, that was actually pretty interesting, hearing some of those encounters, especially some of the aggressive ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I read through, I thought, man, these guys are going to go crazy hearing some of these stories down there.
It's funny that, like you said, you never hear about the happy ones. It's always it is. It's hard to find.
The more you dig into it, the more you dig into this, the more you realize, the happy Harry and Henderson's stuff is total crap, because the bulk of this are these kind of stories.
I tell you about, I think I was telling you earlier about all the comments about our last show about the government cover-up. They're saying, a lot of people are saying they'll protect us from the Men in Black while we're digging with the shovel.
That's cool. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's nice to know we have that kind of support.
Yeah, a lot of people are saying they'll go with us, so it sounds like we'll have a small battalion out there.
Well, now if we can just get the financing to do it, we'll take those folks with us.
Yeah, absolutely. The show is sponsored again by Audible.com. Everyone, if you can, go to audibletrials.com/Bigfoot Hotspot. Yeah, it's funny. The free book I got is read by Gary Sinise. You know who that is, the actor?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I was like, you're going to read me a book, Gary Sinise, every night.
All right.
It's actually pretty good.
It's a pretty cool sponsor, I think. It's an awesome deal to have an audio book to just listen to instead of, like we'd mentioned last time, not having the time or oftentimes the place even to sit down and read a book. If you can just take your phone or whatever other device and listen to a book, it's a pretty awesome way to do it. And this opportunity, for a 30-day free trial helps us immeasurably. So, we definitely appreciate the support by all of our fans. If they want to help us out by signing up for the free trial, and you can cancel it anytime. It doesn't cost a cent, but it helps us a whole bunch.
Yeah, it's the lazy man's way.